I found out my husband was cheating, and then I took everything he had, turning his $10 million fortune he built into my future. He thought his affair would be the end of me, but I turned his betrayal into a $10 million victory. Follow me on this journey to discover how I outsmart my cheating husband, serving his betrayal with matching revenge. I never thought a day like this would come. One moment, I was searching for a folder of business documents in our home office, minding my own work, and the next, I was staring at my life unraveling on a computer screen. Brian, my husband, my partner, the man I trusted more than anyone, was cheating on me. And it wasn't just a fling. It was a full-blown, meticulously planned life he was building with someone else. Clara. I froze. My heart stopped for a split second, and then it pounded in my chest like it was trying to escape. My hands shook as I scrolled through their messages, texts, emails, even photos of places they planned to go, vacations, dinners, secret little trips I wasn't invited to. They had been talking about a future together, one that completely erased me from his life. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. How could he do this? How could the man I loved, the man I built a life with, betray me so recklessly? It wasn't just about the affair. It was the total erasure of my existence in his eyes. I had been careful, loyal, patient, hardworking, and supportive. And what did I get in return? Betrayal. Public, undeniable, soul-crushing betrayal from a man I call my own. When Brian walked into the office that afternoon, I didn't even wait for him to notice the storm brewing inside me. I turned, holding my phone like a loaded weapon. "Brian," I said, my voice low, trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "Who is Clara?" He froze. His smug smile faltered for a moment before he tried to cover it up with a shrug. "What are you talking about?" he asked, feigning ignorance. I threw the phone at him, letting the messages fly across the room like daggers. "Don't play dumb. Don't you dare. I know everything, Brian. Every single thing you've been hiding, every little lie, every plan to replace me. Explain this." He ran a hand through his hair, finally breaking eye contact. "Jessica, look, it's complicated. Maybe if you weren't so controlling, maybe if you weren't always— Don't. You will not blame me for your choices," I snapped, cutting him off. "You made this mess, you live in it. Clara, she's the reason you think you're better off without me, isn't she?" He hesitated, and I saw it, just for a second, an uncomfortable truth flicker across his face. But then he leaned back, his tone cold and dismissive. "Jessica, let's be honest. We've been struggling for years. You know that. You've been focused on your career, your projects, and maybe Clara, she gets me in ways you don't." Everything inside me froze, then shattered. The words hit me harder than the betrayal itself. He was actually telling me that this woman offered him something I couldn't, something he deemed more valuable than our marriage, with everything I have invested for us to get here, and all the years of loyalty, of patience, of sacrifices I made, ignored, invisible. I felt my knees weaken, but I forced myself to stand tall. Not for him, not for his mistress, but for me. I wouldn't crumble. Not now, not ever. "You're wrong, Brian. I am not powerless. I am not to be overlooked, and I am not letting you erase me from my life, or my future." His face tightened, a flicker of fear behind the arrogance he usually wore so well, but fear wasn't enough to stop him from trying. "Jessica, you're overreacting. I've always wanted to explore a long time. You know that. Clara just understands me. She makes me happy." Happiness, that's what he called it? My blood boiled. The man I loved, the man I trusted, was standing there, calmly explaining why my pain was justified because he had found someone else to entertain him, someone else to build his happiness with, while I supposedly wasn't enough. I swallowed hard, forcing back tears that threatened to blur my vision. No, this wasn't the end of me. Not even close. I realized something in that moment, something that cut through the fear, the pain, the humiliation. Brian's wealth, His power, the empire he had built, and yes, the fortune he controlled, was at the center of this betrayal because I have a stake in all of it. He thought he could take it all. Leave me empty-handed and move on as if I didn't exist. But he underestimated me. I wasn't a victim, not anymore. I looked him straight in the eyes. You know what, Brian? Go ahead, take her with you. Take everything you think is yours. But know this, I will not go quietly. This marriage, this life, this money, it isn't just yours to throw away as you like, and I am going to prove it. He blinked, caught off guard. The arrogance faltered. He opened his mouth to speak, to deflect, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned and walked out of the office, my mind already racing, calculating, planning. Every betrayal, every slight, every insult fueled something in me. I realized that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and yes, my life. I refused to be erased. I refused to be humiliated. And I refused to let Brian's betrayal define my future. By the time I reached the living room, I had a plan forming in my mind. A real plan, not just angry words or empty threats. This was about taking control, starting with what was rightfully mine. And yes, that included the fortune Brian thought he could use as leverage against me, all because I was blinded with love to have entrusted everything in his care. I sank into the couch, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with anticipation. I could feel it. The storm was coming, and I would be at the center of it, directing it. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and betrayed. But now I had clarity, and clarity was more powerful than any lie he could tell or fortune he could hoard. The first move had to be calculated. Every step would matter. Every decision would carry weight. But one thing was certain. Brian thought he had won. He hadn't. And Clara, she hadn't either. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to rise from it. I was going to turn his betrayal into my new beginning. And the look on their faces when they realized that, I could almost see it now, would be worth everything, because the woman standing here, shaking but unbroken, was about to rewrite the rules, and I was going to start with the $10 million fortune we built. After that crushing confrontation with Brian, I could feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me like a heavy fog. But instead of drowning in anger or sorrow, I chose to hold back. Anger was a raw, impulsive reaction. It would cloud my judgment, and I couldn't afford that. Not now, not with everything I stood to lose and everything I planned to take. I wasn't about to let Brian or Clara tear apart the life I had worked so hard for. No, I would be methodical, strategic. I would turn the tables on them and make sure I came out on top. For the next few days, I took a step back, letting the adrenaline of my initial reaction fade. I spent time alone, processing everything in my own way. I had always been a strategic thinker, calm under pressure, able to see the bigger picture. And right now, the bigger picture was clear. The best revenge wasn't to lash out. The best revenge was to take what Brian had planned to claim for himself and make it mine. So, I started researching. Every legal option available, every financial document I could get my hands on. Brian's empire wasn't just a mansion and a few luxury cars. It was investments, stocks, businesses, property. He had woven a net of wealth around himself, and I was going to untangle it, thread by thread, until it all fell into my hands. I had been in the shadows all this while, and just left him to handle everything, but now I'm involved. I began with the basics. Our bank accounts, the business ventures Brian controlled, all the investments we had made together. I knew the ins and outs of his empire better than anyone. After all, I had been there from the beginning, helping him build it up. But now, everything I had helped him achieve would be the leverage I needed to destroy him. I didn't waste time jumping into the emotional aftermath. Instead, I reached out to a trusted lawyer, someone I knew who wouldn't just see me as the wronged wife, but as someone who needed practical, no-nonsense advice. The lawyer, Jennifer, was sharp and efficient. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She went straight to the legal options and financial possibilities. Jessica, she said, leaning back in her chair with a thoughtful look, if you're serious about this, you need to file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity. The courts will likely give you a substantial share of Brian's fortune. And if we can demonstrate that he used his wealth to manipulate or control you during the marriage, even more so, you've got leverage here. His wealth, his power, he doesn't know it, but it's all your ticket out. I nodded, taking in every word. I had always known Brian's wealth was at the core of his power, but I had underestimated the leverage it could give me. This wasn't just about securing my future, it was about regaining control of the life I had sacrificed everything for. But as Jennifer spoke, another thought crept into my mind. Brian wasn't the only one who had betrayed me. Clara. She thought she had won, but she had one fatal flaw, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. I began digging into Clara's life, researching her background, her connections. Brian may have been my husband, but Clara was now the enemy I had to outsmart. What I found surprised me. Clara wasn't as untouchable as she thought. In fact, there were cracks in her perfect little world, and I was going to exploit them. She had a past, a complicated one, involving some questionable business dealings that were tied to Brian's investments. There was talk of a failed startup she had been involved with, a startup that Brian had secretly helped fund. But there was more. Clara had a history with certain individuals in Brian's circle, people who weren't exactly the type you'd want to cross. And in one of those conversations I overheard during a family gathering, I learned about a deal she'd made that could easily be used against her. This information was going to be crucial. Not only would it be a blow to Brian, but it would show Clara that she wasn't untouchable. She thought she had secured her place in Brian's life, but in reality, she had stepped into a world full of risks. And now, I was the one holding the cards. I knew I couldn't move too quickly. I had to wait for the right moment. Every step needed to be calculated. But for now, I was playing the long game. I was learning everything I could about the situation, positioning myself for the final blow. Meanwhile, my dear lawyer Jennifer laid out the specifics of my legal options. If we file for divorce under the right circumstances, we can make a compelling case for you to get a substantial share of Brian's assets. But it's going to take time. We'll need evidence. We'll need to build a case. The idea of waiting made my blood boil, but I understood the importance of timing. Jennifer wasn't wrong. I couldn't go into this blindly. If I was going to take everything Brian thought he owned, I needed to be smarter than he'd ever given me credit for. I spent the next few days gathering information, organizing financial records, and making quiet moves behind the scenes together with the ones I already know. I began forging relationships with key players in Brian's circle, people who could offer me insights into his business deals and weaknesses. It wasn't easy, but I was persistent and was smart with my method. That is why a woman should never be underrated. Every step brought me closer to my goal. Brian had built his empire with me beside him, contributing to every aspect, and now wanted to slowly cut me off. But now, I was going to take it from him, piece by piece. And I wasn't going to stop until I had everything I was owed. As the week dragged on, I began to formulate my next move. It wasn't just about the money. It was about showing Brian and Clara that they couldn't mess with me. They couldn't strip me of my dignity and expect to walk away unscathed. And then, Jennifer made a crucial point. Jessica, remember, it's not just the money. You can't let him get away with this. You have to make sure he understands the power you have. The wealth, the business. He's built it all on the back of your sacrifices. Now, it's time to take it back. That's when it clicked. The next move was going to be monumental. I was ready to make my move, to take control, and to set the stage for what would be the final battle. But first, I needed to gather my strength, because the hardest part was yet to come. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt truly calm, but as I held the divorce papers in my hands, I felt a strange sense of clarity, the weight of everything that had happened. All the years of sacrifice, all the love that had turned to ash, was about to culminate in this one moment. I was taking control. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about survival, and my future. Brian had thought he could leave me for Clara, thinking he had all the power with his wealth, his connections, his status. But he underestimated one thing, me. I had always been the quiet force behind everything he did. The woman who supported him, pushed him, helped build the empire he now flaunted with her by his side. Now, as I handed those divorce papers to the lawyer for filing, I realized just how much power I had in this situation. He didn't see it yet, but he would. The papers were served on Brian the following morning. I could almost hear the shock in his voice when he called. He was flustered, panicked even. Brian had always prided himself on being in control, but this was different. The role reversal was too much for him to process. He thought he could discard me like an old coat, but he couldn't. Not when I had everything I needed to dismantle his empire piece by piece. "Jessica, what is this? You can't be serious," Brian said, his voice rough with disbelief. "I'm very serious," I replied calmly, watching as he faltered. He didn't know how to handle this. The man who had always gotten his way was now faced with someone who had finally taken control. Brian quickly shifted into damage control mode, his words laced with desperation. "I'll give you whatever you want. Money, assets, a new house. You can go anywhere. Just don't ruin me like this. We can work this out." But I wasn't interested in his money anymore. Not the way he thought. I had seen through his games, through the way he tried to buy people's loyalty, his shallow gestures to make everything look perfect. It was all a facade. What he didn't know, what he didn't realize until it was too late, was that I had already taken steps to make sure I walked away with much more than just his money. I wasn't just going to be the ex-wife who got a settlement. No, I was going to secure my future in a way that made sure Brian's wealth and everything he had built would work for me. As I sat down with Jennifer, my lawyer, I laid out my plan. I wasn't just getting out of this marriage. I was taking control of everything Brian held dear. The businesses, the investments, the properties, everything. I had kept track of the details, learned the ins and outs of his ventures, the way he manipulated the board, the way he kept everything under his thumb. But now I had the leverage. "You're in a powerful position, Jessica," Jennifer said, scanning the documents. "You remember I said we can file for divorce on the grounds of his infidelity and use his assets against him. The courts will look favorably on you, given the circumstances." I nodded, already calculating my next steps. The divorce would be a public spectacle, sure, but that wasn't what I was worried about. What mattered was what happened behind the scenes, the contracts, the board meetings, the business negotiations. That was where the real power lay. I was going to make sure that I wasn't just walking away with money. I was going to make sure I walked away with influence. With Jennifer's help, we reworked the divorce terms. I wasn't going to settle for the scraps Brian tried to throw at me. I wanted a seat at the table. I wanted to make sure that I could hold my ground in Brian's business empire. I wasn't going to let Clara, or anyone else, take what was rightfully mine. I was the one who had supported Brian from the beginning. I was the one who had pushed him to succeed, who had worked behind the scenes, and even invested my inheritance. And now, I was going to ensure that my contribution didn't go unnoticed. Jennifer drafted the final terms, ensuring that the terms of the divorce wouldn't just benefit me financially, but also allow me to gain influence over Brian's business decisions. I would be a shareholder, a decision-maker. His empire was going to be my empire too. And if Clara thought she was going to inherit anything from Brian, she was sorely mistaken. In the process, I began to form new alliances, women who had been in similar situations, who knew what it was like to be sidelined, dismissed, or taken for granted. I spoke with business moguls who understood the power struggle I was about to engage in. They gave me advice, connections, and resources. People who had been in the trenches before me, who knew what it took to take back control when everything seemed lost. And then there were the women, those who had been in my position, betrayed, discarded, and underestimated. They gave me something I didn't realize I needed until it was too late. Hope. They had fought their battles, and they had won. and now they were here to help me win mine. As I went through the motions of finalizing everything, collecting documents, meeting with investors, speaking to lawyers, I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't known I could feel. Every step I took was one closer to making Brian realize just how much I had learned, how much I had grown, and how much power I had. Brian thought he could discard me, thought he could take everything from me and give it to Clara. But he had no idea that in doing so, he had awakened a side of me that was stronger than anything he had ever seen. And now, it was my turn to take back what was mine. As I hung up the phone after one of my many conversations with investors, a rush of adrenaline flooded my veins. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to take everything I had been denied, and more. Brian had thought he had won, but now I was playing a whole different game. And when I finally made my move, every step had been calculated, every detail meticulously planned. It was no longer about making the divorce work in my favor. It was about turning the entire situation into my personal victory. The empire Brian had built was mine now, piece by piece, and I wasn't about to let him or anyone else take it away. The ink on the divorce papers had dried, but it was just the beginning. I was no longer the silent partner in his success, the woman who stood behind him, supporting him as he played the role of the powerful businessman. Now I was the one in control. He didn't know it yet, but I was already in the driver's seat. Brian was still wrapped up in the mess of the divorce, the public scrutiny, the division of assets, the pressure of everything falling apart. It was all consuming. Meanwhile, I worked quietly behind the scenes. I wasn't interested in flashy displays or grand gestures. I was taking my time, gathering my allies, securing my place within the company, and making sure the board knew my worth. I had learned everything I needed to know about Brian's business, his operations, his secrets. Now, it was time to use that knowledge. I didn't need to tear everything down in one go. No, I was going to dismantle his empire slowly, methodically. And Brian, with all his arrogance and pride, wouldn't see it coming. One by one, I began to align myself with key players in the company. People who could make a difference, who could shift the balance of power in my favor. Investors, executives, even board members, anyone who could help me get ahead. I reached out, subtly asserting my place in the business, showing them that I wasn't just the ex-wife anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. The deals I had once watched Brian negotiate were now mine to influence. I carefully positioned myself in the middle of those decisions, making sure my voice was heard in every meeting. At first, no one questioned it. Brian was distracted. His attention was divided, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks began to show. But I wasn't just securing my future. I was also quietly manipulating the situation to put pressure on Brian, and I wasn't going to stop until he was weak enough for me to take everything. I had studied Brian long enough to know his weaknesses, his insecurities, his fears. It wasn't just his business acumen I had learned to exploit. It was his ego. He had always been so confident, so sure of himself, that he never considered the possibility that someone, especially me, would come for what was rightfully mine. As I positioned myself within the company, I also began to plant seeds of doubt. Brian had always kept his personal life separate from the business, but I knew it wouldn't take much to bring the two together. I had learned all about his relationship with Clara, how deep it went, how involved she was, and what better way to undermine his authority than by exposing the truth. I started quietly leaking details to the right people, board members, employees, investors, subtle hints, whispers about Clara's increasing involvement in his decisions, about how she was practically living in the office despite her role as nothing more than a side piece. At first, it was just rumors, small snippets of information that spread slowly, but as the weeks passed, the whispers grew louder. People started to ask questions. They started to wonder, how much was Brian really in control? Was he allowing Clara to run the show? And with that, Brian's image began to crumble. His grip on his empire, the one he had fought so hard to build, started to slip. I could see the cracks forming every time he entered the boardroom. His once confident posture was now stiff, his gaze wavering when he looked at me. He knew I was playing him. He could feel the shift in the room. The power that had once been solely his now divided between us. But he didn't know how to stop me. He had never imagined that I would fight back like this. Then came the day that would change everything, the day I confronted Brian face to face. It happened during a routine meeting. The usual suspects were all gathered around the table, discussing quarterly earnings and future projects. As Brian began talking about the company's next big venture, I interrupted. I didn't raise my hand or wait for a pause. I simply spoke. "I think we should rethink this direction," I said, my voice calm but firm. "The current strategy is outdated, and frankly, I think it's been failing us for a while now." The room fell silent. Brian's eyes snapped to mine, his jaw tightening. He had always been used to being the one who called the shots, the one who led the meetings, the one whose voice was the final word. But now, I was the one holding the room's attention. "What do you mean, Jessica?" Brian's voice was cold, trying to mask the unease in his tone. I smiled, letting the silence stretch for a moment before I spoke again. "I mean that you've been playing it safe for too long. You've been relying on outdated strategies and letting others, like Clara, make decisions for you. You're letting her run the show, and it's time someone reminded you who actually built this company." The room was still. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, and I could see the doubt in Brian's eyes. He hadn't expected this. He thought he could bully me, ignore me, control me, but I wasn't that woman anymore. "I built this company with you, Brian, and you're about to lose it all because you let your personal life get in the way of your business," I continued, my voice unwavering. "You want to know why you're failing? Because you've forgotten how to lead, and it's time for you to step aside." Brian's face turned red. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. "You have no right to speak to me like that. I'm your husband." "Not anymore," I interrupted. "And that's the problem. You still think you can control everything. You don't even see how much power you've given away." The confrontation was heated, but in that moment, I saw the truth on Brian's face. He was afraid. He had underestimated me, and now he was watching everything he had built slip through his fingers. As I left that meeting, I felt a rush of exhilaration. I had taken control. I had turned the tables, and Brian didn't even know how to respond. The power had shifted, and I was in the driver's seat now. Weeks passed. I stood in the grand conference room, staring out over the city from the high-rise office I now controlled. The view of the skyline was breathtaking, a perfect reflection of the power and success I had finally claimed for myself. My life, which had once been consumed by Brian's betrayal, was now a testament to everything I had fought for: resilience, strategy, and a relentless drive to not only survive but to thrive. It was surreal to think about how far I had come. A few months ago, I had been a wife, a woman scorned, left to pick up the pieces of a shattered marriage. Today, I was the one in control. I had taken Brian's empire, piece by piece, and turned it into my own. And now, as I stood here, the weight of my victory felt so much heavier than I expected. It wasn't about the money, it was about proving to myself that I could do it. I could take back everything he had tried to steal from me, and I could do it better. Brian had always thought I was just the supportive wife, the one who stayed in the background while he built his empire. He had no idea what I was capable of when I had nothing to lose. When the divorce was finalized, I didn't just walk away with a hefty settlement. No. I made sure that I was placed in a position of power, not just financially, but within the company itself. I negotiated a role that would give me the control I needed to influence the company's direction, a seat at the table Brian had once sat at with so much pride. I didn't just want my fair share, I wanted more, and I got it. I had a plan, and it was working. The first phase was securing the assets I was entitled to, and the second phase, what I had been working toward all this time, was taking control of Brian's business empire. I wasn't going to let Clara, or anyone else, stand in my way. The day of the final confrontation came faster than I had anticipated. Brian, still reeling from the loss of the company and the bitter sting of our divorce, had been avoiding me. He'd kept his distance ever since I made my move to claim what was rightfully mine. But today, I was done with the games. Today, I was going to make sure he understood the full weight of what he had lost. I walked into his office, my heels clicking sharply against the polished floors. Brian was seated behind his desk, the one place that used to feel like home for both of us. But now, it felt foreign, cold. He looked up from his papers, his eyes narrowing when he saw me. "You shouldn't be here, Jessica," he said, his voice low, a hint of fear underneath the usual arrogance. "I'm here to take what's mine," I replied, my voice steady but filled with authority. Brian stood up, trying to maintain his composure. "You think you've won, don't you? You really believe you've taken everything from me?" I stepped closer to his desk, placing my hands firmly on the edge. "No, Brian, you took everything from yourself. You betrayed me. You betrayed everything we built together. You let your ego blind you, and now look at where you are." His face flushed red with frustration, but I wasn't done yet. "The company, your empire," I continued, "is mine now. I've worked hard to get here, while you've been distracted by Clara and your own selfish desires. She doesn't care about you, Brian. She's already moving on. And so should you." The truth in my words seemed to hit him harder than anything I could have said. He was silent, staring at me, as though he couldn't quite comprehend what was happening. "You think she's going to stay? You think she's the future?" I asked. "You've built your empire on manipulation and deceit. I'm taking it back, Brian. It's mine now." His shoulders slumped, the last vestiges of his pride crumbling before me. I had said everything I needed to say. "I never thought you'd be capable of this," he muttered, as though finally realizing the extent of his mistake. "You never thought much of me, did you?" I shot back. "Well, now you'll see exactly what I'm capable of." Later that afternoon, I sat in my new office, looking over the business portfolio and contracts that had once belonged to Brian. Everything had changed. The deals, the assets, the future of the company, it was all mine. The ownership stakes I had negotiated during the divorce had given me a stronghold in the company, but it was more than just money. It was power. It was the proof that I had built this. Meanwhile, Brian, sitting in the ruins of what he had once considered his empire, had nowhere to go. His relationship with Clara had already begun to unravel. The truth about their affair had spread like wildfire throughout the company, and investors were backing away. He was no longer the man they looked up to. The walls were closing in on him, and there was no one left to blame but himself. I had already made it clear that Clara's involvement in the business had no place in my future. As soon as she realized the situation, she tried to get her claws into whatever remained of Brian's fortune. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Her downfall was just a matter of time. The business, once under her influence, was now under mine. The whispers about her relationship with Brian, her influence over his decisions, it was all part of the plan. I had taken back control. As the days passed, I watched the company thrive under my leadership. The strategies I had implemented, the changes I had made, everything began to come together. I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. I was the woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes, the one who had turned her pain into power. I sat at the head of the table during meetings, my voice commanding attention as I made decisions that would shape the future of the company. The respect I had once lacked was now mine to command. I had done it. And then, there was Brian, watching from the sidelines. The man who had tried to break me, the man who thought he could use me, humiliate me, and still keep his empire. He was nothing now, just a shadow of the man he used to be. I wasn't just the woman who had been betrayed. I was the one who had taken it all back. And as I looked at the empire I now controlled, I knew that this was just the beginning. The final victory was mine, not just in taking the fortune, but in taking back my life. I had proven to myself and to the world that no one could ever take my power from me again. And women should always fight for what they deserve. Thanks for listening to the end. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more.